Before you ever engage in writing a novel, you want to do what we call pre-writing. And one of the tools that I often suggest and have used myself is brainstorming. Now, some people agree that brainstorming is a great way to come up with ideas, to solve problems within your plot, and just to move forward with your story. And then there are proponents that say that brainstorming might not be the best way to go about pre-writing and coming up with ideas. So today what I want to do, today and for my next video, I'm going to do this in two parts, is I'm going to give you both sides. So today I'm going to talk about why brainstorming might not be the best way to pre-write and to get ideas for stories. Next week, I'm going to cover the opposite side. So let's get started.
You have a story to tell, but you don't know where to start. Let me show you how to free your story. I teach you how to write and how to dig deep in your soul to release your story and make a difference in the world.
I'd like to welcome you to the Julia Mata channel. Thank you for being here. If you're new to my channel, welcome, and I hope that you get a lot out of it. My goal here is just to give you some tips, some ideas, things to think about. What I share with you are the things that I have learned, and you have to determine whether they're going to work for you. But I try to give you the best advice that I can, based, again, on my experience as a writer. I've been writing over 25 years, probably closer to 28 years now. So I'm getting closer to 30. So I should say I've been writing almost for 30 years. So again, welcome to my channel, and let's get started talking about brainstorming. So brainstorming is a way to develop ideas. And usually what we do with brainstorming is we just write down a bunch of ideas. We could write them down as a list. We could do some type of web where we put the idea in the middle, and then we have all kinds of webs kind of going out into into different ways, and then we write from there. So let's say we're trying just to develop like who the characters are, for example, for our new novel that we're writing, and we write down maybe in the middle the character's name. So Paul, right? So Paul or John or whatever. John's an easier for me to remember. So let's say John is our character, and he's in the center, and we're going to have webs going out just telling us a little bit about John, his background, who he is, what he looks like, what he likes to do, what are some of his problems, what are some of his faults. So it helps us to come up with ideas and to start creating this character. We could do this for plot. We could do this for all kinds of things. It's a web. Another thing that that brainstorming is using little sticky notes that help us to see and color code things. So there's different ways to brainstorm. And brainstorming is really just coming up with ideas. Now, who could find fault with that? Like, what is the problem with brainstorming? It should be good, right? Because coming up with ideas is a good thing. So I think a good idea is just to take a step back for a second and think about where brainstorming came from. So brainstorming was created by this guy named Alex Osborne, who decided that this was a good idea for groups, because groups can bring all their ideas together and come up with better ideas. So if you're working with a group or a team, this helps us to brainstorm. It helps us to think of various ideas, shoot ideas out at each other, get them all in one place, and then start going through them. Now, writers decided that, hey, well, if this works, writers and other people decided that this is a great idea. Well, if it works for a group, it should work for an individual as well, to just throw out a bunch of ideas and see what we come up with. But some of the thoughts about why brainstorming is not such a good idea for writers is that we are tossing everything out there, and then we're having to sift through a bunch of this stuff. And it's not coming from someone else. It's all in your mind anyways. They're your ideas that you're sifting through. You're not getting like gold and all kinds of other stuff that's coming from other people and trying to incorporate it into your own thoughts. It's just your thoughts. So there are a number of reasons that people have suggested that brainstorming really isn't the best way for authors to come up with ideas. The first one is that it encourages shallow thinking. So rather than going deep into really understanding what it is we're saying. So like we write down, for example, John, our character, and then we just put maybe background. grew up in an abusive household. Okay, so what we're doing is we're not really thinking deeply enough. And then we could even, I mean, we could have little web lines going past that, or just more notes on that, right? But it rather than going deeply, and writing is about going deep, where it's encouraging us to just put shallow little things out there that we aren't thinking deeply enough about. So we don't want to think in fragments. We want to think in complete deep sentences and really go into detail about why this character had that background and what it means to your story. The second reason comes from the idea that there are no bad ideas. Now, why can this create a problem? Because the idea is for us just to throw out a bunch of ideas out there, right? And that not to judge ourselves and not to judge the ideas. Like, this is a good idea, is it bad? Just put it all on paper and we'll look through it later. So why is that such a bad idea? And the reason is because we're human, and that can backfire on us. So we are already going to be judgmental. So as we're writing things down, we might think that, like, this is not a very original idea. And you're actually going to be right, because the very first few things that you write down are not going to be original ideas. They're going to be ideas that you've already heard, that you've already read, and that they're not new or unique. And you will probably start thinking, well, this isn't good. I've already read this. There's nothing new here. As you continue to brainstorm, though, and this is supposed to be the beauty of brainstorming, is that you're going to come up with then the crazy, wild stuff that your brain is going to say, well, this is kind of dumb. You might write down like the hero is part dinosaur, and when he gets angry, he turns into a dinosaur. Okay, crazy. Maybe like the Hulk, right? The Incredible Hulk. And you will judge and say, well, this is a stupid idea, because this is definitely not what I don't write fantasy. I don't write this. So why would I even write this down? But you're supposed to write down everything, whatever comes to mind. And the criticism here is, well, first of all, you came up with a bunch of ideas that already are not original, and so you're criticizing yourself about that, and then you're coming up with really crazy ideas that you're not going to use anyways because it is too crazy. And so now you're starting to really lose confidence in yourself, because you're thinking, well, I can't come up with anything good. It's either not original or it's just too crazy for me to use. So it becomes a useless activity that just opens you up for self-doubt and criticism. The third criticism is that it separates you from the work. So what you're doing is you're looking for something just to come to you from outside, rather than looking inside, rather than asking yourself, okay, what is it that I know? What is it that is meaningful to me that I would like to write about? I'm not just sitting here waiting for an idea to float from space and come into my head, and for me to write it down and type it into my screen. That's what brainstorming is telling you. You just sit there and just write down anything that comes from outside, rather than really just thinking inside and saying, okay, well, let's see, I had this type of background, or I experienced this in my life, or I traveled to these places and noticed these different cultures, and this is what I want to write about. I want to write about a clash between cultures. So rather than encouraging you to look inside, to look at themes and something bigger, it's encouraging you just to, again, look at surface things that are just coming from outside of you rather than inside. The fourth problem is that it skips the story's foundation. So this is what I was kind of alluding to just a second ago, is that you want to know really why you want to write this story. So I'm not really just writing a random character, John, and just putting everything out about this guy. What I really want to look at is what kind of story do I want to write? If I want to write about culture clashes, why do I want to write about this? What am I saying, and what do I want my reader to get from this story? In other words, I don't want to brainstorm just about a bunch of random ideas or plot points. I want to create a story about something. I want to have a significant story question about my story, and I want to move from there. So once I know that I want to write a story about culture clashes, I want to ask myself, why do I want to write that? And what kind of characters would fit best into this kind of story? So I'm working from a strong foundation, then creating my characters, then moving forward to plot and so on. So that by the time I'm finished, I have a really, really good idea of what the story is about. I'm never going to question what my story is about. I'm never going to question why my characters are in this story because I didn't just brainstorm random stuff. Now, like I mentioned, next week, I'm going to talk about the opposite side of this. I'm going to tell you why brainstorming could be a really good thing for you to do and why I taught it. I taught it even to elementary school kids before I started teaching college, before I started teaching writers. So, and I use it myself. So is it that I don't believe the opposite side? No, I can see why all of these things could cause a problem. But so next week I'm going to go into the opposite, but today I want to I don't want to leave you with just all these problems. I want to give you some ideas on what to do instead then if we're not going to do brainstorming. And the first is to do what we were just talking about, right? Is to ask yourself some of those hard questions. And some of them that I wrote down is, what kind of story do you feel called to tell? Why do you want to tell this story? What kind of story do you want to tell? The second thing might be is like, what emotional truth am I exploring? What is it that I am, again, what emotion do I want my reader to feel, and where is this coming from? And at the end, what do I want my reader to take away from this story? Do you want them to feel, have had, and maybe it's not a deep emotional story, but maybe it's just a humorous story. Maybe it's just a story that helps someone feel better at the end, that think that life is, great, that possibilities are everywhere. It depends on what your story's about, obviously, but what is it that you want your reader to leave with as they close your book? So these questions are going to anchor your creativity in something deeper than just random idea. Your story is going to have a purpose. Now, the other idea that, aside from brainstorming, is free writing. Now, is this the same thing? No, it's really not. So as I mentioned, one of the big problems is just writing these little fragments that don't connect really to anything. And it's very surface, right? It's not going deep. But with free writing, that's the opposite. You're actually going deep. So if you're saying, okay, I'm writing after you've gone through the very beginning part of really figuring out what your goal and your purpose of your story is, now we can start thinking, okay, well, John is our character. Okay, and then start free writing about John. Okay, John, we can do the same thing that we did with the web of just saying, well, this is who he is and this is his background, but we're not going to just do that. We're going to say, okay, well, John grew up in Michigan and he had these problems and he lost his parents at this age and he had difficulty in school. He got tossed out. He became, a juvenile delinquent. Whatever happened, right? Now we're going to go deeper into it. And then why? What caused this? And how did this change his personality? And as we're pre-writing, we're actually writing all of these things down. We're going in deeper and deeper and deeper into this character so that we can understand who this character is. You can do the same thing with plot, right? As you're writing the plot, well, this can happen, and why should this thing happen, and what can be the obstacles to my character during this as you're writing this plot line, as he's trying to reach this goal. So the free writing allows you to almost start writing your story in a way so that you can get into it and really start to understand. The next thing you can do is maybe writing prompts and putting constraints on your story and your character. So what you're doing here is you're putting your character in situations to see how the character behaves, or if this could even be a scene or something that might work in your story. So you might think, well, is it going to work for my hero to become a dinosaur and become angry? And as you start writing, you're like, okay, well, I'm not writing a fantasy. This isn't what I want. However, maybe that's just metaphorical. Maybe my character has an anger issue, and that's really what I was trying to get at, right? Maybe I wrote this, he becomes a dinosaur, but maybe what I'm really trying to say is not that he becomes a T-Rex, but that he has anger issues, and it's related to what I wrote before about his past and all of this, right? And that he becomes, his reptilian mind takes over rather than him thinking logically. So you put him in a scene and see how he behaves. And so you write, for example, write a scene where your character fails at something important. Well, if he is this kind of guy that has a very aggressive personality and a sharp, and a quick temper, then how is he going to behave when he fails at something? And this could be a challenge that he has to overcome during your story, right? Describe a moment where your character realizes that they're wrong. Maybe at some point near the end, he realizes, I've been wrong in the way that I've been behaving. I've been wrong when I did this. But writing that scene, writing him into that scene, it's better than just doing the brainstorm. I mean, he could do this, he could do this, he could do this. Well, pick one. He could do this. Let's see how that works. Okay, so that works. Putting these prompts together and writing these scenes is another way to pre-write before you actually write your entire novel. And the fourth thing is to return and rewrite your story, of course, multiple times, but and give yourself time. Okay, so we do pre-write a little bit. We do want to think through our story and outline and do all of that before we write, because it just makes life easier for us when we finally sit down to write our novel. But we also know that we haven't written it yet and that things could change. And you want to give yourself that time to think about things. And if you've probably noticed that when you are writing, you might be watching a show, you might be reading a book, or something might happen in actual real life that you think, oh, you know what? That's the answer that I was looking for that scene, or that is something that my character would say or do. And so be aware of all of this, because you can bring that into your story as you're writing. So instead of trying to get everything out in one frenzied brainstorm, you're allowing your story to develop over time, because that is how stories develop. So you have something to start with, but as you start writing, you're going to come up with other things. So don't freak out and think you have to have everything written in one giant brainstorm. So notice, take notes, and then bring those things back to your story. And just in case you were curious, even the original brainstorming for groups has been criticized for not working. And the reason that, research has shown that it's really maybe not as effective as we think, even for groups, is that it encourages a few things. One is social loafing, which means that some people are going to contribute a lot less to others and just let the group do what the group is going to do, and they kind of sit back and just wait and maybe add something, maybe not. That no judgment tends to really not work, because we are always judging ourselves. And so we think, even if they tell us there's no bad ideas, people are still going to be afraid of saying something that's too crazy or too wild or too creative or too wonderful, because they fear the judgment of the group, because the group might say, well, wow, geez, she came up with something really crazy there. That's never going to work, right? We still think that we're being judged, even if they tell us there's no bad idea. And then there's the production blocking, which just means that we get blocked, right? There's a lot of people with a lot of ideas, and we can only, can funnel so many ideas through. So some ideas get blocked even before they actually get on like the whiteboard. So even for groups, brainstorming isn't what we think it's going to be. It can be useful, but it's not the best way to get ideas out there. Better way actually would be for everybody to create their own ideas, write their own ideas down, submit them, and then have somebody go through all of them and then write them down, where people aren't having to raise their hand or shout out answers, but they've written them all down, and then we can get them all in one place for people to look at. So even for groups, it's much better for people to work solo than to do everything together and have some ideas not get through, some ideas just self-censorship, things like that. For us as writers, what we want to remember is that brainstorming does not allow us to go deep enough, and that sometimes the ideas that we come up with are too narrow, too shallow. We don't develop them enough. We start to question whether they're good. And then honestly, it takes a lot of time to sift through a bunch of stuff that we just wrote down. If we wrote down a bunch of nonsense that is never going to go into our story, then we've wasted a lot of time putting 80% of stuff that we're never going to use for the 20% of maybe really great stuff that might be in there. So this is just one thought, again, which is anti-brainstorming. It might be, you might agree with it, you might not, but next week I'm going to discuss why brainstorming is actually a good thing for writers, and it can be very helpful for you. So thank you for being here today, for watching my video. I hope that you liked it. If you did, please hit the like button. Please share it on your social media accounts or with other writers, and subscribe to the channel because I'd love to see you again next week. Feel free to comment and let me know what you think and if brainstorming works for you.